is Saturday Morning Recorded, and for this week's special guest, that's my friend Jon Schaff. And for today's weekly tidbit of news, it's that rovers, the things that go across Mars and collect data, they can sometimes get caught in sands, and their wheels get stuck and they can't move. Some researchers are developing a way to have the wheels wiggle so that they can wiggle themselves out of the sandy areas and continue driving forward. Pretty interesting, right? Here's our special guest. Now, Jon Schaff. Now, what is political science?
I go with old Aristotle, and politics is the study of how we ought to live together. And so science, more generically defined, is just a systematic study. So it's a systematic study of how we ought to live together, which is as much, in my view, study of the imagination. You might even say poetry of life. So it's as much as a philosophical study as it is a quantitative study. But that's the field tends to bifurcate into those who are really quantitative and study numbers than people like me who are more into political thought and political philosophy.
So, what got you into politics or political science?
I don't know. It's just something as a kid. For some reason, I was naturally interested in. I remember I was very young. The 1976 presidential election when Gerald Ford was defeated by Jimmy Carter, and then I really remember 4 years later when Ronald Reagan defeated Carter, and for some reason it was just interesting to me. And my dad would come home from work every day, and in my hometown the newspaper was an afternoon newspaper, so the newspaper usually showed up when my dad did, and he'd have the newspaper and he'd turn on NBC Nightly News with John Chancellor at the time, and he would sit there with the newspaper. Then when he was done, I would read the newspaper, and I watched the news every single night. And I don't know why, but I found it really interesting. And I just, all through my youth, I was very interested in history and politics. And actually, when I went to college, I didn't know what political science was. I was going to be a journalism major. That's what I wanted to do. I knew I was interested in politics. I knew I wanted to write. So I figured I'd go into journalism. And I went to college, and I found out there was this thing called political science. And I said, you can like major in politics. You can study that for a living. And I was astounded and happy. And so I switched majors in about 15 seconds. And I was technically a government major. It wasn't political science, but basically the same thing. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Okay, so in the election this year, is this year a normal election?
It's so tempting to do a 2020 joke at this point. Is anything about 2020 normal? I don't think so. No, this is not a normal election in this sense, is that normally we would have seen a lot more campaigning. If you're thinking about presidential races, we had one candidate, ultimately the successful candidate, it seems, Joe Biden, didn't really campaign that much because we're in the middle of a pandemic. And that limited how candidates on all levels could interact with the voters. And so it was a much less personal election, and even debates without audiences, and heck, we had one presidential candidate get COVID in the middle of the race. And so it's very unusual, even now at this point in what was a relatively close race, the fact that I think we're sitting here on the 11th of November, not the 11th of November, the 20th of November, 11th month, 20th day, and I think we know who the president's going to be. It's going to be Joe Biden, but the fact it's dragging out, and even before the litigation started, the fact that it took so long to get even kind of like an initial impression of who the winner was going to be, this is very unusual, but also because the way people voted was different than any other year. The fact that so many people voted before the election through early voting, mail-in voting. Well, we did mail-in voting like we've never done before, at a level we've never done before, and that complicated the count of the vote. And so, yeah, it's a very unusual year. So if 2020 is your introduction to national elections, hopefully there will never be another one like it. So, very unique.
Okay, now you're a published author. You've written 2 books.
Yeah.
What was it like writing those books?
Work. Writing is work. I remember many years ago, I was watching an interview. Actually, it was a film review by Roger Ebert, one of my favorite film critics. And Roger Ebert once said, "There is no end to the terrible writing that comes from inspiration." Writing is work, and that's what, especially when you do sort of academic writing the way I do. It's a lot of research. It's very time consuming. It takes years often to get a book written, since it's only part of what I do for a living. Since obviously I teach a lot, so it's a lot of work. But then ultimately, there's nothing like any time I've been published, either in articles or chapters in books, or in these 2 cases, a book of my own. When you kind of see the final product, and especially with the book, when I held it in my hand, the first one, my Abraham Lincoln book, when I held it in my hand for the first time, and there's sort of a, I did this kind of a feeling. It's very rewarding, and then to have people take interest in the book and people wanting to talk to me about it, it's obviously flattering. And you want to believe that people are paying attention to what you wrote, and at least somebody read it. So it's very rewarding as well.
That's all the time we have for you today. Thank you for talking with us.
Anytime, Cohen.
Here's Eva's Word of the Week.
Promising.
Here's 30 Seconds of Nature. For my book recommendation this week, I'm recommending this book, The Secret of Nim, or its hardcover title is Miss Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. It's by Robert C. O'Brien, and it's a really interesting book. Yeah. For my adventure this week, me and my family were in Aberdeen Community's Theatre production of The Christmas Carol. It performs December 4th, 5th, and 6th, and for ticket and production information, you can go to their website. It has live and virtual performances. This is your host, Colin Vogel, signing off. Here's 30 Seconds of Nature. I'm gonna read you that one too. For my adventure this week, me and my family were in the play A Christmas Carol. Now you can go to their website. Hello, and I'm your host, Cohen Vogel, and this is Saturday Morning Recorded. And for today's week...